And we're going to start today's show. There's only one place to start, of course, is that extraordinary speech this morning, which many people think was pointless. Just a complete nothing burger of a speech, because this morning the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, in her words, set the context for widely anticipated tax rises in the budget by listing the challenges facing the UK economy. And I'm joined in the studio by GB News' political editor, Chris Hope. Chris, welcome to the show. You were there this morning. For that, you have my condolences. I have to say, I watched it in its entirety. I thought it was a masterclass in dodging any acceptance of blame, any acceptance of responsibility. A rolling buffet of excuses was the phrase I wrote down, blaming the Tories, Brexit, the pandemic, austerity. Even had a pop at the Reform Party, a side order of word salads, and finishing with a nothing burger on tax. We didn't learn anything new. What was the point of it today?
Well, the point was to prepare the ground for almost certainly tax increases when the budget happens on November the 26th. That's what it is about. It's a preparation. In a sense, she gave the first one-third of her speech on Budget Day today. So she set out the history, that, as they would see it, the COVID pandemic response, the slow growth, the inability to look at control inflation as they wanted to. They laid it all out there, and yes, nothing to see here, not my problem. It wasn't really Labour's fault. And then she said, well, we had to go last year. And then they want to go towards, here's the choices we're facing now. They are saying to us, with a very tight fiscal position, they could try and cut capital spending, they could ease on the planning reforms, or not go after regulation. They won't do that. Instead, they're going to go and try and tackle the cost of living crisis, NHS waiting lists and national debt by making what they call difficult choices. This is the key quote from what she said this morning, and it's a long speech, and I'm sorry you thought it was a word salad, Martin. I was in the front row, not being called for a question, but I made some notes. Yes. If we are to build the future of Britain together, we will all have to contribute to that effort. That means that is language shifting. That means they're not ruling out increasing one of those three things: VAT, national insurance, or income tax. Of those three, VAT looks safe because you talked about food and energy prices going up. National insurance, last year she did that, adding the cost of NICs to employers. So really we're looking at income tax, maybe 1 or 2p. 2p is worth £6 billion a year, and that could go some way towards restoring the finances.
That will be a huge, many might say, betrayal of repeated pledges not to raise
it would be a
those
betrayal.
three.
It would be a betrayal.
It would be a total betrayal, because repeatedly we will not. This will be a once in a Parliament budget. We will not raise taxes on working people. Those key taxes, Chris Hope: national insurance, income tax, VAT. Already, you can hear the furious sound of U-turns coming from number 11, and people aren't going to swallow this. It's like, how long can you keep blaming the previous regime? How long can you keep blaming external forces? And people are very mindful of the fact, Chris Hope, there's been a huge spending splurge by this Labour government. Yeah. 30 billion plus on the Chagos Islands, 9 or 10 billion on public sector pay rises, carbon capture overseas, giveaways, endless giveaways to Ukraine. A lot of people say charity begins at home. It certainly does if you're a train driver or a junior doctor or a public sector worker. But for those people getting up in the morning, going out and making Britain work, getting into their white vans, driving to work, they're going to feel hard done by if there is a tax rise. They really are.
Yes, they will do. And that language last year from Rachel Reeves at the CBI conference, I'm really clear, she said, I'm not coming back with more borrowing or taxes. So the question really is, how can voters trust you? As I said, she wouldn't take the question from GB News today, but she did try and answer it, or versions of that, to other journalists, it seems. And she's committed to delivering 1.5 million new homes during this Parliament. She's desperate to bring debt down. One of the big themes there was the cost of borrowing. It means that we are just eating into public finances, and that's got to end. But it was in a sense, for me, it was like going to the dentist. You go through all the heart, you get the gas, the air, you get knocked out, but you're not going to have the procedure for 3 weeks. And we were really waiting for the difficult dentistry for 3 weeks. And between now and November 26th, there'll be a lot of speculation about which taxes will go up. but there was no real talk beyond what we had in the summer of any further spending cuts, and we heard nothing or very little on welfare cuts. They will reform welfare, but not to say how much. And just finally, twice I counted mention of tax cuts. We're a long way from that happening.
Well, the market reacted with a wobble in a way that I think many taxpayers will have echoed. The pound plummeted to a 7-month low, at 0.4% against the dollar, the lowest since April 2025. Confidence is low, enthusiasm is low, and the excuses are very, very high. I'm delighted to be joined in the studio by the former Home Secretary, and that is Suella Braverman, MP. Suella Braverman, a pleasure to have your company here in Westminster. How long can Rachel Reeves get away with blaming the Conservatives, blaming Brexit, blaming anything but themselves?
Your personal data could be exposed right now without you even knowing it. And if you want it removed, use incogni.com/GB News in the description now and get 60% off an annual plan on us. Incogni reach out to the data brokers on your behalf and request that your information be deleted from their databases. And they'll keep sending removal requests to make sure your data stays gone. Sometimes your information ends up on strange, obscure websites that automated tools just can't reach. And that's why Incogni just launched their unlimited plan with a feature called Custom Removals. With this, you can submit any link where your personal information appears, literally paste in the URL, and their privacy team will investigate and work to get it removed. And getting started is super easy. Hit the link in the description, create an Incogni account, and tell them whose data you want removed. Grant them permission to work on your behalf, and then all you've got to do is sit back and relax. They'll keep you updated along the way. Incogni is totally risk-free for 30 days. If you try it, it's not for you, you'll get a full refund. So take back control of your personal data today with Incogni. Use our code GBNews at checkout via the link in the description, and you'll get 60% off an annual plan.
Well, I think the British people, and in particular GB News viewers, will see through this attempt to deflect blame. A lot of the consequences that we have seen in the last 18 months on the economy, falling productivity, falling investment, sluggish growth, falling growth, rising unemployment, are all really effects of Labour decisions. There was nothing that's been unforeseeable that's happened since Labour came to government, like COVID or a war in Europe. So, Rachel Reeves has made a lot of decisions, big spending decisions, big tax rises, and she's seeing the effects of those today.
Kemi Badenoch was on form today. She called this one long waffle bomb, and you were there, almost straight out of the copybook of Boris Johnson, a laundry list of excuses. And that's really what it felt like to anybody listening in, a failure to accept any responsibility, and the markets don't like that kind of, blaming anybody but yourself. All it left was the residue, the fear that now tax rises are just inevitable.
Well, it's the great betrayal, isn't it, really? The Labour team expressly promised not to raise income tax, VAT or national insurance at the general election. They were adamant about it. There were no ifs and no buts about it. What does Rachel Reeves do? First thing she does is she raises employers' national insurance. We saw that last year. We're seeing that have a crushing effect on employers and particularly small and medium-sized businesses around the country. Now, the very strong speculation is that she's going to have to raise income tax, a massive breach of her promise. And I just don't see how she'll be able to recover from that, because all trust, the very little trust that remains in this government, will be squandered. And as we've seen in the past, governments don't recover when they make a massive breach of trust like this.
Nigel Farage has accused the Chancellor of spending like a drunken sailor. And it certainly is a feeling that if you're on the dole, or if you're a public sector worker, or if you're a recipient of a public sector pension, or you're a train driver, or you're in the Ukraine or foreign aid, you're sitting pretty. Endless giveaways paid for by the taxpayer, no control on our borders, a huge, huge bill, and yet every time they try and make cutbacks, particularly on benefits, there's a backbench rebellion. This government can't control its spending.
Absolutely, it cannot. Its spending is out of control. We saw massive pay rises driven by militant unions who are effectively running government policy at the moment, but massive pay rises to public sector workers driven by militant unions. We've seen huge expenditure on welfare, absolutely no real attempt to reform or reduce welfare spending. We could be saving billions of pounds by scrapping foreign aid, which we're sending to overseas countries. We could be saving billions by reducing our carbon capture scheme, which is a nonsensical net zero fad. There are many ways in which we could reduce public spending, but this government just won't do it.
It's fair to point out that the Labour government, astonishingly, did cut foreign aid more than Conservatives. But I want to move on to, you mentioned that word betrayal. Let's talk about the BBC. An astonishing story broke in the show yesterday afternoon. An independent external advisor, Michael Prescott, blew the whistle on editorial bias. Clear, provable, blatant, unavoidable bias from the BBC, doctoring a Donald Trump documentary, Panorama, splicing together footage to create an entirely false picture of what actually happened. And now it gets worse. Today we found out the BBC, the quotes, pushed Hamas lies around the world by taking Hamas data, statistics and fake news as fact, constantly painting Israel as the aggressor and minimising any Israeli suffering. It's been a dark time for the BBC, and you've been very outspoken on this, Suella Braverman.
Well, I think the case is now compelling that we need to scrap the licence fee. Those of us have been, many of us, including many of us here on GB News, have been advocating for that for years. But I just think this is indefensible now. Actively doctoring and manipulating the truth is the antithesis of what the state broadcaster should be standing for, and at odds with whatever, everything that respectable journalism represents in this country. How can we have any confidence or faith in what the BBC puts out after this episode? It's a shameful day for the BBC. I think Tim Davie really needs to consider his position, but the licence fee and the whole structure of the BBC is not fit for purpose. And it's the latest in a long litany of failures. They refused to describe Hamas as terrorists. They collaborated with agents or those linked to Hamas to produce a documentary. They've minimised some of the suffering in Israel, and they've amplified and distorted some of the issues relating to Gaza. They've been partisan, misleading, and today I'm thinking, I believe really is a day of shame for the BBC.
So two things. Are you saying that Ofcom should investigate, and should Tim Davie go?
Tim Davie needs to go. I just don't see how he can stay in post after not just this misrepresentation, but also the other scandals relating to the BBC, whether it's Hugh Edwards or other very highly paid people at the BBC who have been really shown to have fallen short of BBC standards of propriety. And I think there needs to be a full-blown investigation into anti-Semitism and also whether the BBC has been adhering to editorial guidelines.
Do you think the Labour Party has got the stomach for that kind of fight? They seem to steam into GB News at the drop of a hat. Cat seems to have got the tongue on this matter.
Exactly. I mean, I thought it was telling this morning, Chris, that Rachel Reeves refused to take a question from the People's Channel. Says it all. Really, they're scared.
Well, it's extraordinary. We are bigger than the rival news channels the past 4 months, but they don't seem to want to take a question, which is, a straightforward question about what our viewers care about. Yeah,
exactly. And I think that's really sticking two fingers up to the British people. People are voting with their feet. They're watching GB News in very, very high and unprecedented numbers. That's a vote of confidence in you. The government should take note of that and pay due deference to that, really.
Suella Braverman, thank you for joining us in the studio in Westminster. Thank you for your company. Always a pleasure.